Joey did not decide to destroy Hayley because he suddenly discovered a conscience. He decided because he recognized himself in the shape of her cruelty, and that recognition made him furious enough to risk everything. He had spent years believing that survival justified ugliness, that the world belonged to whoever could lie the cleanest and strike the fastest, and Hayley had played that same game with a smile so practiced it could pass for innocence. Watching her move through rooms as if consequences were decorations, watching her turn outrage into confusion and confusion into sympathy, triggered something in him that was not moral purity, but wounded pride. She operated like a mirror that showed him the parts of himself he tried to deny, and he hated her for it. Yet the hate did not come from simple disgust. It came from the unbearable fact that she was winning in ways he once admired. The moment he realized she had crossed from manipulation into calculated crime, contracts altered, money routed through shells, injuries disguised as accidents, people reduced to pawns and then discarded, his anger became personal. Not because she had harmed strangers, but because she had dared to treat him as one more disposable tool. That insult cut deeper than any threat. It told Joey he was not the hunter in her world. He was prey she had already tagged and cataloged. Bill's rage was different, heavier, and far more dangerous because it wore the face of restraint. Bill was a man who built his power on the belief that law could be an instrument of order, even when that law was used aggressively. He knew how to win without looking like a villain. He knew how to make a courtroom feel like a stage where truth was not discovered but engineered. And that was precisely why Hayley infuriated him. She had used the same tools, paper, signatures, plausible narratives, strategic tiers, yet she had used them without rules. She had turned legal language into camouflage for theft and violence. She had planted forged documents inside systems designed to protect people. She had weaponized the assumption that a well-dressed woman with perfect timing could not possibly be capable of something monstrous. Bill did not simply want her punished. He wanted to restore the hierarchy she had disrupted, the idea that consequences were inevitable when someone crossed the line.
But beneath that righteous framing was a darker conflict, the fear that he had enabled her at some point, that his own hunger for control had made him blind to her escalating depravity, that he had mistaken her ambition for harmless opportunism because it was convenient to underestimate her. That possibility burned in him like acid because it threatened his self-image as the man who always sees the angles first. Their alliance formed in a place neither of them expected, the shared terror of realizing Hayley had already built a trap around them. Joey discovered it the moment he felt his usual networks go silent. Contacts suddenly unavailable, favors suddenly expensive, doors that used to open with a nod now closed without explanation. That silence was not random, it was pressure. Hayley was cutting off his oxygen, isolating him from the underworld where he was strongest, because she knew that if Joey could not move in shadows, he would have to step into light, and the light would expose him too. Bill discovered the trap in a different form, a smear that arrived before the accusation, whispered doubts that appeared in the wrong ears at the right times, a subtle repositioning of public sympathy. Hayley did not wait to be caught. She pre-infected the environment with her preferred story, so that when evidence emerged, people would already be trained to doubt it. Bill recognized the strategy immediately, and that recognition made him angry in a way that felt humiliating. He had taught clients to do the same thing. He had once respected the elegance of controlling narratives. Now he watched Hayley do it better, and he realized she was not just a criminal, she was a competitor. The evidence they needed could not be simple. Hayley's crimes were built like architecture. Clean lines, hidden supports, multiple exits. Joey pushed first because he was used to risk. He traced the money the way a predator traces blood, through private accounts, shell companies, sudden purchases disguised as gifts, payments fragmented into smaller transfers to avoid attention. Every trail led back to a familiar pattern. Hayley always kept her hands clean by placing someone else between her and the act. She used intermediaries who were desperate, greedy, or terrified. She collected leverage on them in advance, so if they ever turned on her, she could destroy them with a single message. Joey's stomach tightened with the sick familiarity of it. He knew that method. He had used it. That knowledge sharpened his anger into self-loathing.
and self-loathing made him reckless. He started pushing harder, faster, ignoring warnings that this could blow back on him. In his mind, if Hayley went down, the stain of her resemblance to him might go down too. It was an ugly motive, but it was honest. Bill moved slower because he understood the courtroom is not impressed by rage. He began reopening timelines, cross-referencing dates, finding the moments where Hayley's public story did not match the paper trail. He noticed how often documents were corrected after the fact, how often signatures appeared in unusual formats, how often witnesses changed their recollections after private meetings. He found the bureaucratic fingerprints of tampering, small, almost invisible. He also found something worse, connections to people whose names could damage him if exposed. It meant Hayley's crimes had brushed against the edges of Bill's own world, and she had either known it or engineered it. That discovery turned his anger into something colder. Bill hated being touched without consent, hated being made part of someone else's scheme. Yet he also feared what the exposure would cost. If he brought her down, he might have to reveal how close she had been to him, how much he had once allowed in. He might have to admit he misjudged her. He might have to give up power to preserve truth. That was not a legal problem. It was an identity crisis. As the investigation tightened, Hayley began her counteroffensive with the precision of someone who had prepared for this day. She did not confront them directly. She inflicted doubt. People Joey trusted suddenly received anonymous packets showing old sins he thought were buried. Bill's professional relationships started to fracture under quiet insinuations that he was acting out of personal vendetta rather than legal duty. The pressure did not explode, it seeped. It made both men irritable, paranoid, and vulnerable to their worst instincts. Joey's temper began to leak into his choices. He started breaking rules he once followed, not out of necessity, but out of rage. He wanted to hurt Hayley the way she hurt others, to make her feel hunted. That desire frightened him because it proved she was already inside his head. Bill's restraint also cracked, but in a more frightening way. He began calculating not only how to win, but how to win without losing his image. There were moments when he considered alternative solutions. Quiet deals, private threats, containment instead of exposure. Each time he considered it, he felt disgust for himself. Yet each time he rejected it, he felt fear. Hayley was the kind of enemy who punished anyone who tried to make her visible. The worst part was the collateral. Every time they uncovered a new piece of the puzzle, it led to someone else who could be destroyed by the truth. A staffer who had been bribed, a partner who had been blackmailed, a friend who had looked away because denial was easier than conflict. The evidence trail was a chain of human weakness. Joey despised those people and also understood them. Bill judged them and also recognized his own capacity to do the same if the stakes were high enough. That moral ambiguity became the poison in their alliance. They were united by anger, but anger is unstable fuel. It makes men brave, and it also makes them cruel. At times, Joey wanted to burn everything down, to expose every name and let chaos do the punishment. Bill wanted something cleaner, a case that would stand, a conviction that would hold, a downfall that looked inevitable. Their motives collided inside each decision, creating constant tension. Joey's impatience threatened Bill's strategy. Bill's caution threatened Joey's sense of urgency. And hovering above it all was Hayley's capacity to exploit fractures. Then came the moment that shoved them both to the wall. They discovered evidence that proved Hayley was not only stealing and forging, but orchestrating harm. An incident that had been dismissed as accident now reframed as intent. A sequence of events that only made sense if someone had engineered them. The evidence was sufficient to ruin her, but it was also sufficient to ruin the wrong person if it was mishandled. Hayley had planted her own fallbacks. She had arranged for a scapegoat, someone whose history made them believable as the villain. She had designed a narrative where her guilt could be redirected. Bill saw the trap immediately. If they moved too fast, they would feed her story. If they moved too slow, she would disappear and take the truth with her. Joey's rage exploded into a brutal clarity. Hayley did not just commit crimes, she treated lives like pieces on a board. Bill's anger sharpened too, because he realized she was daring him to play by rules while she played by instincts. The rules were the only thing separating him from becoming her.
The decision they faced was not a cinematic choice between good and evil. It was a dirty choice between different kinds of damage. To guarantee Hayley went to prison, they would have to expose enough of the web that it would break people who did not deserve to be broken. They would have to admit their own proximity to the mess. They would have to risk backlash that could destroy careers and reputations. Joey's internal conflict reached a violent peak. Part of him wanted to protect his own name, to keep his skeletons locked away. Another part wanted to punish Hayley so thoroughly that no one would ever confuse her for a victim again. He despised that he cared about his name at all, because caring meant she still had leverage. Bill's conflict was equally vicious. He wanted justice, but he also wanted control over the shape of justice, and the situation refused to be controlled. He could already imagine the headlines, the accusations, the people who would call him hypocrite. That fear made him furious because it felt unfair. He had not committed her crimes. He should not pay her price. Yet in the real world, justice never arrives without someone bleeding. When they finally acted, it did not feel triumphant. It felt like stepping into a storm they could not survive unchanged. Joey used the tools he hated himself for mastering: pressure, timing, strategic exposure, turning Hayley's own methods against her. He forced movements in the shadows that made her networks crack under their own tension. He pulled threads that caused intermediaries to panic, and panic is the enemy of conspiracies. Bill built the public case at the same time, weaving the evidence into a narrative too coherent to dismiss. He anticipated her defenses, her claims of persecution, her attempts to reframe herself as misunderstood. He prepared for the way she would try to make them look unhinged. But preparation did not protect them from the personal cost. Joey's anger became ugly, corrosive, pushing him toward cruelty. Bill's anger became isolating, turning him colder with everyone around him. Each man, in his own way, began to resemble the kind of person Hayley would create if she could shape her enemies: paranoid, bitter, increasingly willing to sacrifice others for the outcome. Hayley's final reaction was not public hysteria, it was calculation. Even under pressure, she tried to negotiate reality.
She tried to shift blame, to fracture alliances, to present enough ambiguity that people would hesitate. She counted on their fear of scandal. She counted on their exhaustion. She counted on their need to appear respectable. And for a moment, the strategy nearly worked. Because Bill felt the old temptation to contain rather than expose, and Joey felt the old impulse to run rather than stand still long enough to be judged. That moment was their true test. Not the evidence, not the legal filings, not the surveillance and timelines, but the psychological cliff where both men had to choose whether they were doing this for justice or for ego. If it was ego, they would flinch at the cost. If it was justice, they would accept the cost and move forward anyway. They moved forward, but it did not cleanse them. It scorched them. Joey learned that vengeance never stays aimed at one target. It spreads into everything you touch. Bill learned that truth, once released, does not obey its release mechanism. It consumes whoever stands closest to it. And as the walls closed around Hayley, legally, socially, strategically, both men felt a satisfaction that was not pure. It was mixed with dread, because they knew she would not go quietly. Even if she ended behind bars, she would keep trying to control the story. She would keep trying to punish them through the people they cared about, through secrets planted like landmines, through loyalties she had already poisoned. Joey and Bill had chosen the hardest path, but they had also chosen a war that might not end with a verdict. They had pushed Hayley toward prison, yes, but in doing so, they had pushed themselves into the open, where every weakness could be exploited, every past sin could be weaponized, and every future decision would be shaped by the knowledge that once you expose a monster, you never fully escape the shadow of how close you once stood to it.